Well, I'm here with Mike Birns, and we're sitting on the banks of the Kings Bay right here out in front of us. In fact, right near a manatee sanctuary. And Mike, why don't you tell us how you got involved with manatees, and what kind of things your work with manatees involves on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, well, this area kind of brings me back a long ways. I was certified to scuba dive here in Crystal River way back in 1974, and kind of grew up on both coasts in Florida and in California. I've got a background in marine science from the University of California at Santa Barbara. I've had a lot of different jobs in recreational and scientific diving throughout the years. I'd even taught diving in Central Florida in the late 80s, where I did take people out to swim with manatees and come see the manatees as well. Always had very good experiences. Back in 1989, there was even a manatee educators course that was offered through Fish and Wildlife. I actually took that and did a number of those types of specialty instructions. Then life found me down in the Florida Keys, where I was the mission coordinator at NOAA's National Undersea Research Center for 7 years. I helped scientific divers and researchers with fish projects and coral reef and crustacean and oceanographic projects, as well as some NASA and military projects at the underwater habitat. But then in 2006, there was something called the Reduction in Force Funding Cuts, and a lot of NOAA programs were downsized. And, so I found myself back in the private sector. At the time, one of my wife's boys was in Gainesville, and so I knew about the manatee ecotourism here, and it just worked out really well for us to come up here and partake in that and be a little closer to the boy up in Gainesville. And so since then, since 2006, I've been involved in manatee ecotourism.
Okay, so you take tourists from all over out to get in the water with manatees and have that wonderful experience
Yes, I do.
that we know is unique. And maybe you could speak about how unique that is compared to, say, other wild animals and even other manatees in other places.
Well, the very fact that we're allowed to get into the water and interact with a wild manatee, and that people have been doing that in this area since the late 1960s. Obviously, it was made famous in 1972 during that very famous and special Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau episode. I mean, one of the best examples of that is on Sunday morning, just this week, I had a woman from Germany, and she had been waiting to come to Florida for 20 years to specifically do this, to come to Florida to swim with a manatee. And we got into the water and found one of the manatees that I know out here on a regular basis, that I see day in and day out. There is a recognition and a mutual understanding, and when she came to face to face with this animal, she had an emotional experience that was, I mean, it was just a release. She just started crying, and she was just overwhelmed by the whole experience, and you could see the animal respond to her as well. It was very, very touching.
So I imagine you see that a lot with people that this is their first time, with a wild animal that's 1,200 pounds right in front of their face.
Yeah.
Kids, talk about kids. How do they respond?
Well, children, that's an interesting evolutionary process here. One of the hardest parts of my job here is to really convey the wildlife experience, and what I call the turnstile towards the Disneyization of mainstream America and Europe, and that these animals don't perform on command. And this isn't a petting zoo or a theme park, and so as an industry leader, I've been trying to move our industry into that direction, and it's responding well. If you talk to fish and wildlife officers, they've been talking about how interactions have become better and more passive over the years. And so I think we've done great strides in bringing the industry forward. I think the next phase is to bring some of the private boaters and the rental boaters along, and that's coming along maybe more slowly than some of our industry critics would like, but it's moving along well. It's moving in a nice progressive order. So I'm happy with how the industry is shaping up, And this is a really, really unique experience. So if we don't teach the children to interact with them properly, if we don't give them that experience, and this will be probably pretty controversial because both humans and manatees are tactile animals. And so I think that they actually gain a lot from it. And as long as we hold them back passively, because there is that initial lunge forward, that initial energy burst of the child when they're first in the water. And as long as we can kind of, get that going with the proper games rather than the drill sergeant, don't do this, don't do that, but turn it into one of my favorite techniques on the boat is that we play Simon Says Freeze Like a Statue or freeze tag. And what's interesting to me is almost every culture seems to have a version of freeze tag. The British are stuck in the mud, the Germans turn to stone, the French is pas de toi soleil, and the Dutch have the absolute best name for it. It's called Anna Maria Cuckoo. And so the children can relate to that. So they're all playing freeze tag, and I'm always it, and I touch the child, and they freeze like a statue, and it seems to work out fairly well for a technique like that.
So, just to clarify, you mentioned the word passive observation a couple times. Can you elaborate on that and contrast your idea of, sort of the ideal passive observation of manatees with some of the transgressions that go on when you get a bunch of people packed in a small area with a bunch of manatees?
Well, there again, I find nothing wrong with passive interaction. I think the manatee is going to engage us. From my experience on a summer manatee, about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 will engage us. In the winter time, because we have such large numbers of them here, probably 1 in 10, 1 in 12 will actually seek to engage us, and I don't see anything wrong with that. They're naturally curious animals. The hares have vibrosi. They get a lot of tactile information from their environment. So when I was helping to construct the META guidelines, for me, a passive observation is to stop 1 human body length back from the animal. One of the biggest things when we first started talking about, and people were talking about 10-foot rules, and some in the industry felt that was too close, and we started talking about a 6-foot rule, and then somebody said, well, split the difference and make it an 8-foot rule. Well, most people, don't know what 6, 8, and 10 feet looks like in the water.
It's underwater, yeah.
On the boat, I'm dealing with people from master divers to people who've never worn wetsuits before in their life. And so what I find is everybody knows what about a human body length is, and that, as you get the magnification of the water and the interface with the lens and all, so it turns into about 6 or 8 feet, as most people estimate what a human body length is. And that's a good rule. Stop about 1 human body length back and just observe. Then if the animal comes up to us, 1 open hand out on the surface so that nobody could even think you're trying to hold, ride, restrict, or restrain the animal. Let the animal come and go, let them do its thing. What I like to say is we're going to play freeze tag with the children. Let's bring it back to the children's example. All right, freeze like a statue. Simon Says freeze like a statue, freeze tag, whatever. Let the animal bump you, brush you, nuzzle you, ignore you, do whatever it's going to do, and when it's done, just let them go on. The initial excitement, and we see this much, much more with the unguided rental boat, private boat experience, is that, the focus becomes on just touching the animal rather than what did I learn from it. Once we get it back into an educational situation, it becomes a learning question. All right, so what did it feel like? Was it slimy? Well, that's the algae that grows on it. Was it rough? Well, that's its clean skin, and it shares a common ancestor with the elephant. Did you feel the coarse hairs? And then you can start talking about the tactile responses of the manatee and the vibrosi and the nerve receptors in the brain and all these kinds of things. So you can turn that into an educational experience, and now you have had a real learning experience from that. It's not, and I start my trips by saying, if your goal out here is just to touch a manatee, SeaWorld's 90 minutes down the road. You can get that in captivity. But for the wild interactive experience, not everybody's going to get that. And on the best guides, they understand that going in. And I think as an industry, we're doing much better with that. I think we're moving forward. I think we're moving in the right direction. As I said, maybe not as quickly as some of the industry critics would want us to move, but when it's all said and done, we have the largest, strongest, healthiest population of manatees in the state, according to Dr. Bob Bondi and Dr. Jim Valade. We have the first or second fastest, depending on how you want to look at the statistics, rate of manatee population growth in the state. You know, and more manatees are rescued in this area than in any other part of the state, I feel, because of our captain's daily presence on the water. We're out here watching and observing their behavior every day. We know when an animal needs help. You know, most of us love these animals as much as our own family, because we're out here with these animals 5-6 days a week. We see them, we get to know their personalities, and they have very diverse personalities. As much as, you know, your family dogs and cats, they have different personalities, you know, some more aloof, some more friendly, some more curious, some more timid. And you can actually even watch manatees help each other and help each other learn. And it's interesting to sit back and watch them.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago the acronym META, or META. Could you elaborate on that and tell us a little bit of the history of that organization and what it's about?
Okay, well, META is the Manatee Ecotourism Association of Citrus County. We represent about half of the manatee tour operators in the area here. We have, let's go with our stated mission is to promote tourism through education, awareness, and conservation of our local manatees. And so these are a group of dive tour operators, normal tour operators, who are committed to professionalism, to education. Our guidelines go above and beyond the minimums that are required of us by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. We have sought to forge partnerships and alliances with nonprofit organizations, with government organizations. On my agenda this week is to put together some health and safety partnerships with Nature Coast EMS and increase the safety of the bay. We're going to have a paramedic trainer come and work with our captains, and as an EMT myself, I'm always looking at the health and safety and well-being of the public.
A short distance of where we're sitting is a National Wildlife Refuge, and it's managed by an office that's within view over here, the Crystal River National Wildlife Refuge Office, which is part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so ultimately, they have the highest level of authority in terms of setting the rules for use in those areas where it's considered critical manatee habitat around here. And as you well know, some of the areas are critical enough that they're roped off, and so none of us can go in there except the manatees, and that's called a sanctuary. And so I guess that, it sounds like the goals of META are partly to work in harmony with the refuge managers and other players in this sort of scene, so that everybody can kind of get along and get what they need out of the situation. And of course, the charge of the refuge is to protect the manatees. And you're interested in doing that because, as a commercial dive tour operator, I mean, that's your business. That preserves the basis of your livelihood.
Absolutely. There is no doubt in my mind that the overwhelming majority of all the guides do this because they truly love the manatees. And once again, working in concert with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, one of the partnerships that we value very, very much here at META, and everything that goes along with managing the refuge like that. But even if you get some outlier out there who is doing this purely on a commercial level, just for the sense of self-preservation, it makes sense that he would want to do everything he could to preserve and protect these animals so that he has a business in posterity.
Right.
And so sometimes, when I first started, I was like, we set these guidelines that we all could agree on. And at first, I don't care if you're following these guidelines because, like me, you genuinely love these animals and you love to be in the water with them every day, or if you're doing that purely out of a self-interest in commercial, as long as you're following the guidelines. It works for me.
Let's say there's a person out there that's young that's been out with you on one of these manatee tours, and maybe they've been on several of them, and they've kayaked around here, and they've just fallen in love with this whole aquatic environment, and the environmental aspects of it, as well as the manatees. What sort of message or suggestions would you have for a young person that has that passion and wants to try to figure out what can I do in my life with my career that would incorporate some of this into it?
Well, good question. I would, well, obviously to do what I do, you need a captain's license. So first would be start building up your, what we call our sea time, and take a Coast Guard captain's course and get your license that way, if you wanted to guide the way I do it now. Not very many people in my industry have a marine science background, although it's hugely, hugely helpful. So, funny thing, some of the folks that I have sent to you in the recent past, I kind of joke with my guests, if you want to study manatees, it's best to be a gator. So, you know, send them over to you at the University of Florida. But, I mean, you know, Florida naturalist courses are good. You can get this in this day of the internet, and libraries are just wonderful resources. You don't really have to have a formal education to really appreciate these animals and do this. You can glean a lot of this from the materials that are out there and from your own. For mine, a captain's license, a dive master rating, although not all the captains are dive masters. Dive instructorship is good. You get a lot of rescue and health and safety. First responder courses, because you are going to run into accidents and different kinds of emergencies on the water, and you know, that's very helpful. At the very minimum, you're going to have advanced first aid, CPR, life-saving kinds of things. And just, you know, sounds like the person you're describing to me is going to be a sponge for knowledge anyway. So, you know, you're published online. Dr. Bob Bondi, Dr. Arbor Bondi, excellent. Your text, the Florida Manatee Conservation and Biology, or Biology and Conservation?
It's biology and conservation.
Biology and Conservation. That's literally the text to start with. And highly, highly recommend that you get that and read that. And just spend as much time out here with them as you can.